Destiny. Destiny is a game that promised everyone to be the next big thing. The Star Wars of gaming, a universe so vast even Bungie couldn't quite control it. Destiny's launch felt like a high-speed train with no brakes. A train we all jumped on, only to realize the destination wasn't what we expected. But it's a lot like a bad first date that somehow turned into a lifelong love relationship. Destiny evolved, stumbled, and eventually found its stride for a bit. But why exactly were the community of gamers divided over Destiny? Why was this game so loved by many, including myself? Well, it's actually quite a long and messy story, and to understand all of this, we need to revisit 2009, where the idea was first sparked. Welcome to the year 2009, where James Cameron released the #1 grossing movie of all time, and when Kanye West interrupted Taylor Swift at the MTV Music Awards.
Beyonce had one of the best videos of all time.
We also had some amazing games like Plants vs. Zombies, New Super Mario Bros., and Assassin's Creed 2. And all the way over in Bellevue, Washington was Bungie Studios, who were just finishing up with Halo 3 ODST and Halo Reach. And these games would mark the end of their direct involvement with the Halo franchise. But because of this decision, many players started to become more and more concerned about the future of Halo, wondering if the next developing company that Bungie was giving it to would honor the legacy of the Halo franchise. And at the same time, there was also curiosity surrounding Bungie's future, with fans questioning whether the studio could create a game as successful as Halo. But the excitement grew when Bungie revealed that they had something big in store, along with ambitious plans for their next big project. Given their strong track record, fans were optimistic about what was to come. But unfortunately, there were more concerns that began to rise, especially when players found out about the partnership with Activision. If you don't know already, Activision has a history of monetizing the heck out of games, like Call of Duty. Players were worried that Activision would completely mess with Bungie's creative freedom and that they would be subject to corporate-driven decisions. And who could blame fans? They were rightfully worried, especially when Bungie was taking a huge risk with starting a new franchise and also partnering with a company that is known for doing this monetization. In fact, fans started to worry about the future of Halo because now 343 Industries is taking control of it. And even though Halo has a loyal following, fans were still skeptical and thought that this new developing team would put their own spin on the game, which would completely go a different path. But now that Bungie was teaming up with Activision, Bungie announced that they would be making a 10-year contract in April of 2010. Bungie had major hopes for this game, and they had this groundbreaking idea that hasn't really been done before, at least successfully, and that's a shared world shooter game that mixes the online multiplayer aspects of an MMORPG. They were pretty much trying to create a futuristic World of Warcraft game, but with first-person shooter mechanics in space. And good grief, was this going to be a long, bumpy ride for them. Because the idea of Destiny is really cool and sounds great on paper, but when actually trying to make this game, it's a lot harder than what people think. In the early stages, Bungie was working many hours to establish the core vision for this game. Destiny was intended to have a vast universe with deep lore, mysterious characters, and a world that travels into the unknown. It was supposed to be a shared shooter world where you run around with your friends on different planets as you take on the darkness. The tone for Destiny was very hopeful, mysterious, and adventurous, but still had the dark grit like they had in their Halo games. The game was well balanced with the tone and overall feel, but as the game began to take shape, internal creative conflicts began to emerge. Joe Staten, one of the key writers for Halo, helped build Destiny's story and world, but his visions were reportedly much more narrative-driven, and the rest of the studio was trying to focus more on the gameplay and experience rather than the story. Joe wanted to make Destiny a character-driven narrative, where our character grows and makes decisions along their path. But the leaders at Bungie had different ideas and wanted to give players freedom and a more open-ended approach. And so later on, Bungie would then scrap a lot of Joe's ideas for the story and would use most of it for lore. And because Bungie decided to not focus on the story, this would create a massive problem later on. But Destiny was also facing major technical issues with their game, because we have to understand, Destiny wasn't just a player versus enemies game, it was also going to incorporate player versus player game modes. So the big question Bungie was wondering is if they would even be able to do all of this. And for some unknown reason, the entire Bungie team just couldn't get on the same page for how this game should be made. We had developers who knew the limitations and that the ambitions were just too high. And then we had their publishers who didn't really care and were just trying to reach for the stars. And so there was this major clash between everyone on what Destiny should actually be. The team was wondering if they should focus more on a character-driven story, single-player experiences, or should the game just lean into being an expansive online multiplayer experience. Right now, Bungie was under a lot of pressure and was just completely confused and lost on what their game was going to be. And interestingly enough, Bungie didn't even have a name for this new game they were creating. So they went with the name Project Tiger, which would also be the name for their new game engine that they were working on, also representing their departure from Halo. And the engine that they created was meant to be able to handle all the ambitions for their game. But unfortunately, the engine they created seemed to be causing the team massive headaches. First off, the engine wasn't even able to handle small changes or tweaks to the game. Something as simple as just adjusting the level difficulty was almost impossible for this new game engine. And every time Bungie tried tweaking something, it would take hours and even days just to change something very small. And because of how long it was taking to do these adjustments, Bungie had to scrap a lot of their original ideas for Project Tiger. And it also wasn't helping that Activision was breathing down their necks. Activision wanted Project Tiger out as soon as possible so that they can start making bank off this game. But as Bungie dove into the creation of Project Tiger and were trying to wrap up this game as soon as possible, the tensions between the team grew significantly, and the team started to disagree with a lot of the creative decisions. The tension came to a head when Jason Jones took an extended leave during a critical phase of development around 2013. While he was still involved, his absence during this pivotal time created a leadership void, complicating the entire development process. And because of this leave, it left Joe Staten, the game's lead writer, and the rest of the team in a difficult position. But in late 2013, just a year before Destiny's scheduled release, in September of 2014, Bungie decided to overhaul the entire story of Destiny. Joe Staten had written an intricate, lore-heavy story for Project Tiger, which involved complex characters, detailed backstories, and much more linear plot structure. However, unfortunately, Bungie's leadership felt that the story Staten had crafted wasn't really meshing well with the game's emerging focus on a shared world gameplay, and that the story was just too rigid for a game that was supposed to evolve over time. And this pretty much led to Bungie scrapping a lot of the story, leading to a massive rewrite. And because of this, Joe was livid and just couldn't do this anymore. And so, Joe decided to pack up his bags and walk out on the entire company because of this change of events. And this was a major blow to the development team and Bungie, as Staten had been a major player in crafting the previous narratives like the Halo franchise, but also because he was a part of that family. They grew up together making these games, and he was there when it first started with the Halo franchise. But because he left, Bungie was left scrambling together the story and trying to put it piece by piece together to make this story make sense. And key characters like the Speaker, the Stranger, and the Queen were given minimal development in the game, contributing to Destiny's infamous narrative gaps. And because of what happened, Bungie decided to create Grimoire cards that would be collectible cards that players could unlock by completing certain in-game activities, and they would contain deep lore and backstories for the Destiny universe. And on paper, that doesn't sound too bad, right? But actually, these cards weren't even accessible in the game. You had to use Bungie's website or use their mobile app to read the cards, just to know about the lore and the story. But on the bright side, these Grimoire cards did contain a lot of juicy lore and stories that players will come to love for many years. But one thing Bungie seemed to be doing so well with was getting people hyped for their new game. The marketing team went hard for these trailers they made, and they put a strong emphasis on multiplayer with friends. The advertisement around this game was mysterious and gritty, placing players into a futuristic world that was complete completely unknown. And a lot of the trailers kept advertising that players will meet other players from around the world as they take on monsters and aliens, even being able to design their own character the way they want. And even though fans didn't know all the drama happening behind the scenes and the struggles Bungie had, they were still excited and had major hopes for this game. Everyone was really on board to see where this new franchise was going to go because of Bungie's previous success with Halo. In fact, Bungie even made live-action trailers with Hollywood filmmakers to produce high-quality cinematic trailers that looked like a blockbuster movie, especially for their one trailer called Become Legend, where the ad was directed by Joseph Kosinski, who was known for doing Tron Legacy. These trailers would showcase Guardians battling enemies on each of the planets, while having fun and making jokes. Destiny was looking great, and people were really on board for this new world and game. And P. Parsons even came out stating that they wanted their franchise to be on the same level as Star Wars. And so after 4 years of developing this game, it was time for Bungie to release Destiny 1 to the public. The date is September 13th, and Bungie is setting up final preparations and getting ready to see how fans will react to the game on September 14th when Destiny releases. The tension was building among the entire staff, especially from the past 4 years of grinding in the development room. But as the day started to come to a close, fans started lining up at the stores around 9 p.m. for the midnight release at GameStop. And yes, GameStop was still a popular thing at the time. People were stoked and were talking and bantering about Destiny and how excited they were. And this was truly a major moment that was happening in our culture at the time. Destiny was the most pre-ordered game of 2014, but also of any video game of all time. And if you were around during this era, then you definitely remember your friends and family hyping this game up because it was the most talked about game of the year. And as soon as the clock struck midnight, the doors opened up and everyone rushed in to buy a game of Destiny 1. And when the players got home to start loading this game up, there was this excitement and mystery that everyone felt when waiting for the game to load. It truly was a special moment among the entire community of players. And after a few days of playing this game, reviews from the critics and players finally emerged, but surprisingly, it was not what Bungie expected. Destiny was receiving praise, but not a lot. The game was also receiving massive loads of backlash from fans and players. Halo fans were waiting for this new world that Bungie was creating for 4 years, and when the game finally came out, well, it was just mediocre. It was a massive disappointment among players, and Bungie divided the entire Halo fanbase on whether this game was good or not. But were fans really right about this game being complete garbage? Or were they just being over the top and just being harsh? Well, as players dove into the world of Destiny, the community quickly found itself split on the game. On one hand, there was a lot of love for Destiny. The gunplay was flawless and was satisfying and fulfilling for everyone. And granted, this was Bungie after all. If anyone knew how to craft tight, responsive shooting mechanics, it was Bungie. Players marveled at the stunning visuals and the way Bungie designed each planet with breathtaking details, and I felt the same way when I played this game for the very first time. I remember waking up at 5:30 a.m. before school started, and I was going to the moon as my warlock. And when I arrived on the moon, I was so scared because it was still nighttime outside my house, and I was on this planet that was completely abandoned with these creepy hive creatures running around. It truly was a terrifying moment, but also very, very fun. And playing this game for the first time was just the coolest thing and was just awesome for everyone who did. But whether you were exploring the moon or battling on Mars, there was this sense of scale and wonder that pulled you in as a player, which is what happened to me and many of my other friends. In fact, the multiplayer, especially the PvP mode, was a hit among the competitive crowd, and playing with your friends and meeting others online was also a special moment that made a lot of players love this game. These were the best parts of Destiny, but unfortunately, there were many cracks in this game that shined very brightly. As much as I loved this game and as much as this game looked and felt amazing, there was an emptiness that many people just couldn't ignore. The story, or lack of, was a major point of contention. Fans expected an epic, sprawling narrative, something on par with Halo, but what they got felt disconnected, vague, and incomplete. Even the most hardcore players were left scratching their heads after missions, wondering what they just played. And then there was the grind. Players quickly realized that beyond the initial wow factor, Destiny was built around endless grinding for gear. It wasn't that players didn't want to grind, it's that the rewards often didn't feel worth it. The random loot system left many feeling frustrated, and once the honeymoon phase was over, players started to notice how repetitive the missions were. You'd run the same strikes over and over again, fight the same enemies, and the excitement wore off very quickly. So here we are. On one side, you had fans who loved the core mechanics, the shooting, the PvP, the Nightfall, the community, and also the raids. But on the other, there were those who felt let down by the story and narrative. Like Destiny had promised them the world but only delivered half of it. What was meant to be this groundbreaking new franchise from the creators of Halo became one of the most divisive games of the year. And funny enough, because of the grind system that was so garbage in this game, then came the infamous Loot Cave. If you were around during the early days of Destiny, then you'll remember it as a both running joke and a symbol of the game's deeper issues. Players discovered this cave in the Cosmodrome where enemies would continuously spawn, and by standing just far enough away, they could shoot into the cave and farm endless streams of loot. For hours on end, players lined up blasting away at waves of enemies, all in hopes of getting that one piece of gear that would finally give them the edge. It was ridiculous, but in some ways, it became a defining moment for the game. The fact that players would spend hours shooting into a cave instead of actually playing the game spoke volumes about Destiny's broken loot system. Bungie, of course, shut it down, patching the cave and leaving a cheeky in-game message about the honored dead. But the damage was done. The loot cave had become a meme, a reflection of how players were more motivated to stand in front of a cave than engage with a larger world Bungie had crafted. It highlighted the growing frustration with how random the rewards were, and how much grinding was required to get anything worthwhile. For many, the loot cave became a symbol of Destiny's greatest flaw, an incredible game that just couldn't get its loot right. But at the same time, that's what made Destiny's loot system so thrilling when it actually worked. Sure, the grind did feel endless, but when you finally got that one drop, the one you had been chasing for weeks, it felt like winning the lottery. Now, while Destiny stumbled right out of the gate, Bungie quickly moved to patching things up with its first two expansions, The Dark Below and The House of Wolves. The Dark Below released in December of 2014, and it introduced new story missions, gear, and a raid called Crota's End, which is personally my favorite raid of all time. But while it added some much needed content to the game, the expansion still didn't quite fix Destiny's deeper issues, especially around its lackluster story and repetitive grind. Like, seriously, every mission you do in Destiny 1 was identical to like the last one you did. But fans appreciated the new raid and loot. But like I said, it felt like Bungie was just slapping a band-aid on the bigger wounds. Then later on came House of Wolves, which released in May of 2015. And while it didn't include a traditional raid, it introduced the Prison of Elders, a wave-based PvE mode, and the Trials of Osiris, which quickly became a fan favorite for PvP events. House of Wolves showed Bungie was listening, as they offered more ways to engage with the game outside of just grinding. Prison of Elders was a blast to be involved with, and fighting waves of enemies as you try to survive and to control zones was just a blast. Still, both expansions were seen as stepping stones, fun content drops, but the larger overhaul of Destiny needed was yet to come. But just when it seemed like Bungie was starting to find its footing, they began building anticipation for something much bigger, a looming threat that would shake the entire universe to its core. Fans could feel the hype rising as Bungie teased a villain far greater than anything we'd faced before. And so, then came the Taken King in September of 2015, with the main villain, Oryx, the expansion that truly transformed Destiny and marked a major turning point for this game. Unlike the previous two expansions, this was much more than just new content. It was a complete overhaul. The Taken King introduced a new villain called Oryx, the Taken King himself, who sought revenge for the death of his son, Crota, who players killed in the Dark Below expansion. With Oryx came a sprawling new storyline, far more engaging than anything in the original game. Bungie finally delivered on the epic saga fans have been craving, complete with cinematic cutscenes and actual character development for fan favorites like Cayde 6 and Eris Morn. The expansion also introduced a new subclass for each Guardian, giving players more ways to customize their playstyles. And then there was the raid, King's Fall. a massive, complex, and challenging experience that many consider the best raid in Destiny history. But The Taken King didn't just succeed because of its new content. It was how Bungie reworked the core systems. The quest system was revamped to offer clearer progression, and loot drops became more rewarding and predictable, addressing the frustrations that had players plagued from the start. Even the UI saw improvements, making it easier to track quests and bounties. The Taken King felt like the game Bungie had always intended to release, and for many players, it was the moment Destiny became a must-play. It transformed a divisive, often frustrating game into a unified experience where players could finally see the vision Bungie had for this new universe. The expansion wasn't just a course correction, it was a second chance, and this time, Destiny delivered. But following the monumental success of The Taken King, Bungie found itself at a crossroad, contemplating the future of Destiny and the direction they wanted to take. The expansion not only revitalized the player base, but also re-established Bungie's reputation as a powerhouse in the gaming industry. The team recognized that they had struck gold with the narrative depth, engaging gameplay mechanics, and community involvement that The Taken King offered. With newfound confidence, Bungie began focusing on expanding the Destiny universe further, aiming to build on the lessons learned from previous iterations. Bungie started to emphasize storytelling and lore, weaving more intricate narratives into their upcoming content, and ensuring that player feedback would play a crucial role in shaping future updates. And this period also marked a shift in how Bungie approached player engagement, as it began to foster a more connected community through seasonal content and events, setting the stage for an evolving world where Guardians would face new challenges. With the bar set so high, Bungie was determined to keep the momentum going and to build a legacy that would resonate with players for years to come. But as 2015 progressed, and it was finally the summer of 2016, players were starting to get annoyed that there wasn't anything new to do in Destiny. One thing that is very common with Destiny is that their campaign expansions are known for being beaten with only a couple of hours, which is why so many players had been starving for new content ever since The Taken King, which came out back in September of last year. But Bungie was teasing something big again, a new expansion that players would be thrilled about. Rise of Iron was the new upcoming expansion, and it was going to be launched on September of 2016. It brought with it a sense of renewal, injecting Destiny with fresh energy as players dove into the story of the Iron Lords. This expansion shifted focus to the mysterious Plaguelands, a new zone teaming up with the threat of the Siva, an ancient and powerful nanotechnology that has gone rogue. The story missions had players unearthing the tragic history of the Iron Lords, who had sacrificed themselves to contain the spread of Siva centuries earlier. Now, as one of the last remaining Iron Lords, players were tasked with eradicating this new devastating threat. The narrative had a grittier tone, which was a nice shift from some of the Destiny's earlier, more ambiguous storylines. For many, the expansion finally felt like Bungie was trying to deliver a more cohesive and emotional story, even if it wasn't perfect. The crown jewel of Rise of Iron was undoubtedly its new raid, Wrath of the Machine. This is probably one of the most popular raids in all of Destiny 1. But while Rise of Iron brought much needed content and gave players more to do, it still didn't completely solve Destiny's long-standing issue. The repetitive grind still loomed large. And while the story was more coherent than the previous expansions, us players felt it was still lacking the depth we were hoping for. But despite Destiny's many flaws, Destiny 1 somehow managed to capture the hearts of millions and millions of players, including myself, becoming a game that kept people coming back to it even years after its launch. The core of Destiny's appeal lay in its unparalleled gameplay, the smooth, responsive gunplay, the exhilarating movement in the feel of its vast atmospheric worlds. Bungie's experience with the Halo series really shined through, making every firefight satisfying and dynamic. Whether players were exploring alien landscapes in PvE or testing their skills in the intense Crucible games, the sense of tight mechanics coupled with its addictive loot system created a powerful loop. Even when the story felt lacking or the grind became monotonous, there was always the chance of chasing after that perfect weapon roll or assembling a set of legendary gear. Every reward drop felt meaningful, and the hunt for the next piece of coveted loot became a driving force behind the community's dedication. But Another reason why I think players were so attached to this game, including myself, was because of Destiny's social aspect. From day one, Destiny fostered a sense of community, both within and outside of the game. Whether it was forming a fire team to take on the latest raid, struggling together to beat Crota's End or Wrath of the Machine, or even teaming up for the Trials of Osiris on weekends or on Friday nights, the game forged friendships and bonds through shared victories and defeats. Bungie's raids in particular stood out as iconic endgame experiences, blending puzzle solving, teamwork, and combat in ways that made them some of the most memorable moments in all of gaming. These communal challenges made even the game's shortcomings more tolerable, as players felt connected to each player in their journey to conquer the hardest content. In fact, the world of Destiny, its hauntingly beautiful landscapes, mysterious lore, and massive scale kept all of us invested. Despite a story that often felt fragmented or completely garbage at times, there was always a feeling that something bigger was just around the corner, a sense of potential that left every single one of us hopeful and eager to see how Bungie would expand and evolve in the universe. The love for the game wasn't just about what it was, but what it could become, and players stuck around for this promise of future greatness. But despite its imperfections, Destiny was the driving force behind the demand for a sequel. Players knew there was a bigger vision that Bungie hadn't quite reached yet, and the idea of a sequel felt like the necessary step to evolve the game beyond what Destiny 1 could even offer. A sequel would provide Bungie the opportunity to wipe the slate clean and build on the lessons from the first game, and that's exactly what you think Bungie would have done. But unfortunately, well, let's just say the sequel didn't go the way players thought it would. But that'll have to be for another time, because that drama fest is a whole video in of itself, which I'm definitely looking forward to making, but like I said, it'll have to be for another time. But thank you again for watching. If you're looking for another video to watch, I highly recommend checking out the game that was impossible to make until it wasn't. Personally, one of my favorite video essays I have done on this channel, and I highly recommend checking that one out. But thank you again, and I will see you in the next one.